This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Welcome to the Starlight Ballroom. Hey!
Hello everyone and welcome to Shipwrecked and Comatose, the Red Dwarf podcast here on the We Made This podcast network. My name is Kurt North and I am flying solo on this trip as we continue to delve into the Back to Earth universe of Red Dwarf. And joining me today is someone who actually helped produce it, Robert Turnbull, who's also on our network, and you might have heard us talk about him on the Back to Earth specials, actually, because we've been talking off air for various different things, but we thought we'd get him online and speak to him about his Red Dwarf fandom and also the Back to Earth adventure that he went on. So without further ado, please welcome Mr. Robert Turnbull. Hi, Rob. How are you doing?
Hello, I'm good. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure.
It is. Yeah, we were talking. Last time we talked on a different podcast was about Fire Walk with Me. So, which has a Red Dwarf illusion, actually, doesn't it?
It's. I suppose there's some connections there. Mm. Yeah. Well, this is the thing. We've chatted quite a lot, but never actually about Red Dwarf. So it's quite nice to sort of to be here to talk all things dwarf or all things that I'm allowed to by my contract.
Yeah. Oh, there's the NDAs and whatever that you might have signed back in 2009 or whatever. I'm sure it'd be good. I'm sure it'd just be good just to get a general feel about how everything went down with Back to Earth and the hardships and the struggles that the production had and things like that as well. And obviously just what it was like being on set and things. But before we do that, though, you've done your podcast, You Have Been Watching, which is a Britcom-based comedy podcast there. So you've touched upon Red Dwarf before. We've heard Tony murder the Shipwrecked and Comatose lyric theme tune. How did you think that went down? What were your thoughts when Tony was trying to sing it, not knowing any of the lyrics?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Well, he's not really watched it at all, has he?
No.
It's bizarre. It's like, because, it's way up there for me, and then the theme tune's like way up there for me. And then he did this wonderful rendition of God knows what. It's kind of, and comatose when I'm sitting with my toes and the fish are in the flying away. All right, Tony, thanks very much.
Yeah, exactly. No, but you are a Britcom, obviously a British comedy fan. Before we start into the office exam, just where do you place Red Dwarf in the ether of like sort of British comedy and, what would you say? Obviously, there'll be things above it, but where do you think it lies in the culture and legacy for British comedy generally?
Oh man, I mean, I think it's really high up there. I think it's and I think it's an important one as well, because you got to remember as well. We talk about Red Dwarf kind of falls into phases, and there was like the first couple of seasons, and then there was like the sort of the middle series there, and then of course we've got the Dave era now, and there've been even within those kind of like different eras, different series have had different flavors to them. I think it has genuinely kind of like evolved with sitcom. The tastes of sitcom hasn't necessarily always gone in the right direction or worked in the right way, but I think it's a really integral part of British sitcom, because it was sort of born out of that early, or the sort of the mid 80s, almost that kind of, I always hate, if you've listened to the show, if anyone's listened to our show, I fucking hate every time I say alternative comedy, yeah. But we say it all the time because it's like a shorthand, but it was almost off the back of that, especially with the radio show and the kind of the other stuff that Rob and Doug were writing on. So it's kind of born out of that, but with this sort of intense intelligence, but it's also that kind of high concept sitcom that really the 80s was all about. But then it kind of like carried through, and it's influenced so many other shows. And if I'm being honest, hand on heart, I don't think it has the same place in the collective consciousness as it used to.
Yeah.
I think it has maybe fallen back into niche, and there are lots of, I know people who are diehard Red Dwarf fans and they've not seen anything from the Dave era just because of how they watch TV and where they watch TV. Mm. But I think that, in that whole pantheon, for me, it's right up there. It's up there with Blackadder. It's up there with Only Fools and Horses, and all these kind of like greats, especially the greats of the 90s, the One Foot in the Graves and these kind of shows. I think it's a great sitcom, and it showed what you could do with sitcoms, and it's usually very funny and very clever, and I think it's not some weird little quirk. I think it's a really influential show. Look at how many shows we had afterwards that kind of took from or borrowed from kind of Red Dwarf and what it was doing.
Yeah, I mean, I just today was talking on my other podcast about just something in general. I think it was the SAG strike. And there's something that happens. I won't say anything on here because of our friends, and similar to what you're saying with people not seeing much on the Dave stuff because of the way we consume television. But I mentioned something that was like quite surprising for me in that some of the discussions that we've had in the first 6 seasons, where you're talking about sort of the way that, that they would really focus on something that's kind of quite deep and quite, actually, if you look under the tone of it, some of the actual science fiction concepts are actually quite things you can talk about forever. And it's like, oh, it's really good what they've done there, etc., etc. You don't get that as much in the Dave era, but there's certain things that are coming in, especially around AI, that they have talked about, and it's really interesting that they still are able to do that. Maybe not as high quality as what they used to do, but I still think Dave's a fantastic, the Dave era is a fantastic era, and it's something we're looking forward to, because as you say, Colin and Mark haven't seen the Dave era at all. We're about to, in about 3 weeks' time, actually watch all of Red Dwarf 10. So, I
mean, that's really exciting to have new Red Dwarf.
Yeah.
And, like you, I think the Dave era, there's really, really good stuff in the Dave era. I do genuinely like Back to Earth, not just because I worked on it. As a fan, I really enjoy that as well. And I think that it's quite exciting. It was exciting for me, not just when I started working on it, but after working on it. It's really exciting to have new Red Dwarf. And you're right. I think it's not necessarily as sharp or insightful as it used to be, but I don't think that it's not lost that. It's just maybe is a little bit softer, or is focusing in different areas. Maybe it's a bit more character based. I think Doug's a bit more focused on exploring the characters outside of those kind of like big sci-fi concepts, but it's still some really solid, fun stuff that they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I found myself, because I pretty much know all, I think 72 episodes it is, inside and out, and I do find myself now actually deciding I'm going to watch 10, or I'm going to watch a couple of episodes from 12, and that's fascinating that actually some of the newer stuff I actually feel like watching. It's not just the fact, it's a Dave one, it's a lesser thing. There's some brilliant moments, and I can't wait. There's certain things I can't wait for Mark and Colin to come about, and I just want to see their faces. That's the whole point for us to actually watch it together, because I've just been waiting for this for almost 3 years now, because they haven't seen it. But it is like you say, it's like it's not as thing in the zeitgeist, because the likes of them haven't watched it. They got to Back to Earth and then didn't watch any more. So it's going to be really fascinating when we get there. But let's start talking about the because we'll generally talk about a lot of things during the course of this recording. But let's start with the officer's exam that we always do. Okay, so if I go over question 1 for the officer's exam, then when did you first discover Red Dwarf, and what was your first memory of it?
I mean, basically from the beginning. I would like, hand on heart, I was like sort of like 8, I guess, when it came out. So I cannot for the life of me, I couldn't in good faith say that I watched the first series when it was first broadcast.
Yeah.
But I definitely watched the second series when it was first broadcast, and it could possibly be that they may have run the first series straight into the second series, which they used to do a lot in those days. You'd get a repeat the first series and the second series. So that could be when I first watched it. So almost from the very beginning, in terms of broadcast. But then from series 3 onwards, it was absolutely definitely first day of broadcast, because I remember being really excited after the end of series 2, being really excited. And then the trailer started up for series 3 and watched it, and it just blew my mind. This whole kind of like shift of design and look of the thing and that whole scroll at the beginning. So I guess that kind of that big shift into series 3 is probably like the biggest early memory I have of it.
Right.
But yeah, pretty much from the get-go, I was there. Yeah.
Oh, cool. So what would you consider to be your favorite episode?
Genuinely, I know this is a really boring answer. I don't have I cannot say this is my favorite episode. Like we just talked about the fact that the show kind of breaks up into eras almost. So again, it almost comes down to like, what's my favorite series 1 and 2 episode? What's my favorite series 3 to 4 episode? I mean, I tried scribbling down some favorites, and I'm sure they're not going to be anything controversial. It's like Future Echoes. I adore Future Echoes. I love that episode.
Yeah.
Backwards, Better Than Life, sort of earlier stuff. Dimension Jump is brilliant. I love Dimension Jump because it's that kind of taking the characters that we know and flipping them on the head, and especially Rimmer's so established by that point. More recently in the day stuff, love the, what's it called? M-Court.
Oh, M-Court, yeah.
I think that's such a good, and it's got that old school kind of dwarf feel to it. I genuinely really like Back to Earth for a lot of reasons. Inquisitor's just fantastic. I can't put my finger on one. I could probably just about give you one episode per series. Yeah. Which is a sort of a favorite, but there's no one episode that I love. Obviously stuff like Back to Reality is like had huge impact when I first watched it.
Yeah.
But again, it's like you said, sometimes you think, oh, I really fancy watching a series 10 episode. And I suppose for me, it might be that point that when I'm sitting there thinking, oh, I really fancy watching an episode from series 12. For that split moment, that's my favorite episode because that's the one I want to watch. Yeah. So it's just, it's too much of it. Sorry, I know that's a cop-out answer. But...
It's okay. I'm used to hearing that from you, so you're all right.
Cool.
We had that same discussion last week on a completely different thing. So I'm going to ask this question, and it's going to be season. So which series would you consider?
That's a little bit easier. So as much as I think every single series I love, every single series and special I think have great things that work about them. Series 5 for me, I think there's a real, for me, every episode in series 5 is a banger. I really like every episode in series 5. And it's that real sweet spot between how well established they are from the beginning, but they haven't got that slight sort of laziness that they get in series 6. Series 5 is my favorite overall series in the same way that I love all of it. But yeah,
I think that's when we've gone through the episodes, series 5 seems to be kind of when we're criticizing it or sort of having a critical eye over it, seems to have gone up in a lot of people's estimations. I mean, don't get me wrong, 3 to 6 are great. So we're not saying that 6 isn't a bad season, because it is. It's a fantastic. All of them are great, but series 5, we were quite surprised at just how many strong episodes there are.
Yeah.
Overall, it's a consistent season, really is. Yeah, no, I think probably series 5 is probably one of the better ones, and probably vying for that favourite season now, because it's definitely, as I say, it's come to fruition through talking about them. So that's intriguing itself. What about character then? Because this has split our Shipwrecked and Comatose crew up in the past with whose people's favourite character is. Which character would you identify most with in relation to that? And I know it's not necessarily favourite, but who do you think leaps out at you the most?
So this is really difficult, and I'm going to kind of split it into 2, because it's also difficult because there's basically 4 characters. 5 if we're including Holly, who kind of comes and goes. It's 4 characters, so it's because they're so well written and so tight. They're so different. There's no kind of there's no throwaway character. There's no one character. So I obviously love them all. In terms of just the shits and the giggles and the watching it and the sort of the emotional response to what is happening, then it is Lister. Lister is just fantastic. He's the everyman. But in terms of the narrative and the character development and what they've done and where they could go, and in a lot of cases the performance, then it's Rimmer.
Right, yeah.
Because I think that, I'm kind of sort of with Doug on this, because, he has more of an approach of Rimmer being this kind of, this almost like a tragic figure. And, especially when you look at his novels, there's the kind of the potential inside Rimmer. And I genuinely think across the series, the character who has had the most development is Rimmer. And I find that the most interesting. And there's something really fascinating about Rimmer, especially because he knows he's a git. But he also knows that he doesn't have to be a git. So when we have these little flashes of Rimmer actually being a little bit brave, I love those moments. Or Rimmer, sort of like when he knows that he's being cowardly and he admits it, but does it anyway. I love those moments. Dave, it's a bit more, he's a good guy who tries his best, and he doesn't ever really develop outside of that. He matures a little bit, and he kind of goes up and down, and we see that he's a really good guy. But in terms of his core, who he is at the beginning and who he is now, he never really changes. He he doesn't go through anything huge that kind of like changes his character. And obviously not in a superficial way that the cat doesn't change, which of course is brilliant. But I think as an actual, if we're talking like pretentiously about the drama of it and the human development of it, then it's Rimmer. Rimmer is my favourite.
Okay, I'm just making a note for later. Something you just said there, I need to remember to ask you. Favourite moment? Now, this could be 5 seconds. This could be a full scene. So something that stands out to you as a particular moment in Red Dwarf's history that you really, really enjoy. There
is one, and I think that, like, a looser answer, I come back to the whole kind of, the favourite episode thing that, there are too many. There are fantastic moments, and I stand by that in terms of moments. But the one that will always live with me is the game over moment in Back to Reality. That first moment, because when I watched that as a kid, or however old I was, like preteen, just blew my mind, blew me away. And I'd seen that concept in other science fiction and other books that I'd read. It wasn't like it was a new concept to me, but I did not expect that. I hadn't seen that coming. If they had put anything like that in trailers of the day, I did not see or remember them. So that absolutely just like rocked my world. And also because it was Red Dwarf, there was a little part of me that you're kind of like, okay, so is this the new status quo? Is this it? Is this where the series is going? What's happening? And then, of course, later on, we have the fantastic chase scene and everything. But that first little moment where it just goes, boom, this was all a video game. That always sticks with me. And there are funnier moments, and there are maybe more poignant moments, and probably cleverer moments throughout the whole run of Red Dwarf, but that always sticks with me. I love that point. And
that's where the linkage from us from last week, because obviously the Volta Colonel is Harold in Fire Walk With Me in Twin Peaks.
He is, yes.
Yeah. So
yes.
So yes, I was putting that on our messenger group before, but so there's one final question, and this is the difficult one. Would you like some toast?
No, I don't want any toast.
A crumpet?
No crumpets.
Bagel? No?
No toasted bread at all.
Okay, fantastic. So let's dive into a bit more of a deeper discussion on both yourself, Robert, and Back to Earth. So we should go and do that now. You're credited as producer on Back to Earth. That's right, isn't it? As production team. Production team. So how did you first get into the industry then? What made you decide to go into kind of TV and production like that? What ignited you to do that?
I mean, it sounds cheesy, but watching shows like Red Dwarf, that was one of the things. Like when I was a kid, when I was 7 years old, for anybody who remembers, the Scouts introduced a thing called the Beaver Scouts. Immediately now I'm going off on a tangent. I apologise.
No, it's all right. It's fine.
It's pertinent. I guarantee. And I was just old enough to go to the Beaver Scouts. And I went to Beaver Scouts, and I was a little bit older, and all the other kids were a bit younger than me, and I was at the oldest end of it. And we did a play for Christmas. And I auditioned for Captain Hook. I didn't get it. And I'm 43 now. I'm not bitter about it anymore.
I'm 43 as well. So yeah,
But,
I feel you.
like,
I feel you.
Yeah, exactly. But I was really annoyed at the time. And they gave the role of Captain Hook to some kid who was shit. And I just got to play like pirate. And so throughout the rehearsal process, I kept telling this kid how he should play it. So I'd say, oh, when you do that bit, when you come in through there, you should like put your arms up and go, ha, and that'll be really good and that'll get a laugh. And then I started doing this with other kids in the play. It's like, oh, when you're sitting there, if you fall off when you're trying to get on the hammock, then that'll be really good. And then afterwards, I was kind of like talking to my mum about this, and she was like, well, that's a job. Maybe you want to do that as a job. And I was like, oh. And that's when I kind of figured out the concept of directing and producing and making, dramatic art. And so from that point on, of like 7, that was what I was focused on. So I went to college, studied media performance, went to university, studied media and performance, left university and spent 7 years working as a cinema manager because I had bills to pay.
Yeah.
So I had a real kind of like hiccup, but basically that was my focus, like working in TV and film and broadcast. That was my focus from very, very early on. So all of my education, all of my sort of, working towards career from an early age was all focused towards that. And as much as I was, paying the bills by working in the cinema for a few years, I was still doing freelance work, a videographer, even did the odd wedding here and there and that kind of thing. And then sort of not long before doing Red Dwarf, I started to get a few bits of just like running work and production team work on TV adverts and this kind of stuff. A couple of heinous TV reality shows that I don't even want to mention, never went on my CV. So that was kind of it.
Right.
It was like I didn't fall into it. I didn't, I just kind of like, went for it from an early age.
Yeah, so a real kind of clear goal from young age. That's really good that you did that. I mean, just coming from an empathy point of view, from like, so to say, I mean, I still run a cinema. The idea that obviously the gig economy is something that like people like yourselves would have to deal with, because that's something that I did for a number of years. Playing in the band and doing all that type of thing. That especially for somebody who you need that work, and it is a gig economy work, especially what's happening with SAG at the moment. That's coming to the forefront a lot, really. You were saying about obviously adverts and working on a couple of TV shows and stuff. So Back to Earth came, 2008, was it? 2007 maybe? Was that somewhere around there that you
something like that. I forget now because I am old, and it was anything more than 5 years ago, and I can barely remember it. It's like,
well, let's say to mid to late 20s then.
Yeah. And so the reason I got work on Back to Earth, and it's a classic, who you know, not what you know, is that my partner at the time, she got a job on it. And so when she first started working on it, doing the pre-production and everything, she she kind of let me read the script, which obviously you're not supposed to do, but hey ho. And it was really exciting. It's like, this is amazing that you're working on this. I love it. It's one of the reasons that I wanted to work in TV and stuff. It's like, is there any work going on it? And she's like, unfortunately, no, because there's just no money. There is zero money. They can't afford. They don't have a proper production team. They don't have runners or anything like that. There was like one guy who was work experience, and he was at uni or whatever he was doing. So even he was only turning up like, every other day.
Right.
And it was just like, we don't have the money for anyone. It's like, oh man, it's fucking heartbreaking. It's like, but at least by proxy, I get to see and experience. And then when it kind of like started ramping up towards the actual record, the RX schedule, she basically said, well, look, just come in with me. Just come in and start making tea for Doug.
Right.
I was like, okay. So I literally just wandered off the street. I made a cup of tea, took it to Doug. I was like, morning, Doug, is there tea for you? I was like, oh, thanks. Oh, yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Walked out, and that's it. And I just started working on that day, literally like complete off the street. And within a couple of days, it only took a couple of days. Within a couple of days, I'd gone from being somebody who Doug was too embarrassed to pretend he didn't remember the name of, to somebody who, before takes were big, Doug's like, where's Robert? Can we get Robert down here? We need Robert for this. So I just ingratiated myself and got on the payroll and on the credits and all this kind of stuff. But so it was like it wasn't exactly a blag, but I just kind of went and made myself available.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great story.
But the thing is, it was a great production. It was all, there was so much kind of like everyone mucking in.
Yeah.
That somebody turning up who had some experience, who basically said, here I am, I'll help you out. I didn't get paid very much for it, but nobody did.
No.
I think they just appreciated me. And I'm a very charming and personable person.
that does help as well, doesn't it, really? So obviously with your partner getting that role then, when you saw it was Red Dwarf, when you saw it was like new Red Dwarf, the fact that we haven't had anything, that Dave obviously were kind of bankrolling it to a degree. How did you feel about that? You know, as I say, someone in your late 20s who's seen it since 8 years old. Can you remember just kind of when you saw that script and just the fact that it was a little bit cheeky to see it, and how you felt about that?
The reality is from what the transition from what Dave commissioned to what then got produced and I joined, and then what actually made it to screen is a very different thing. So it wasn't quite as simple as, for me, it wasn't as simple as seeing a script and being told there's a new Red Dwarf happening. Yeah. So for me, it was a slow build up to that realization.
Right. Okay.
Which was still like super exciting. The moment that that I realized that was what was going to happen out of this project that had been commissioned, I was just like, that's incredible. And seeing the theme and what Doug was doing with it, in terms of the, I'll avoid spoil. We're avoiding spoilers, aren't we? Really?
No, we've done Back to Earth now.
Oh, you're good. You've done all of it. I wasn't sure if you'd done all of it. Cool. But seeing what he was doing with the squid and everything, I was like, that's cool. That's fun. It's like, I see what he's doing. It's like, this is maybe his last ditch attempt to get Red Dwarf back. It's like, this is, he's really, there's an opportunity here and he is absolutely grabbing it. So yeah, go for the squid, go for a fan favorite, do these kind of things. It's just like I get that. So it was really exciting, but like I say, for me, it wasn't the same process as just being told there's a new Red Dwarf.
You've been a cinema manager. When you get like a film, say Terminator 2 comes through in 1993, it wouldn't be called Terminator 2. It would be called something Land of the Monster or something like that, which is completely different because they didn't want the reels being nicked, for example. Was there anything like that, kind of like just coded scripts or just like general feelings and stuff like that? Was there stuff like that kind of thing?
There was a little element of that. I mean, I know that I'm sure you guys have talked about some of the ideas that were, originally
for the movies.
There was going to be a 2-episode, and there was going to be the live recording, and all this kind of stuff. But even before that, there was a different variation of what was going to be made. So,
right. Okay. Yeah.
So all of that, it was a different. Yeah, it was a different process for me. So it was really exciting. It was really, really exciting. And the moment that it all coalesced and it was like, we are getting new Red Dwarf, that was the point that I was like, oh, well, now I definitely need to work on this. It's like no more kind of like smiling from the sidelines. I'm going to walk in and do you want to know how I ingratiated myself? Sorry, this is really, you can cut this out if this is boring. When I would make tea for the cast, because it's quite dark in studio and stuff, and it was like writing people's names and stuff is really tedious. For the 4 guys, I would draw a little smiley face of their character. So a smiley face with fangs, a smiley face with an H, a smiley face with a dreadlock, and a smiley face with sort of an angular top. And that was how they could identify their teas, and they fucking loved it.
Brilliant.
I'm pretty sure that's what got me on the payroll.
Yeah, so artistic skills are also available. If you need a commission, please contact Shipwrecked and Comatose and we'll get you in touch. Brilliant. Okay, then, so you've ingratiated yourself to the crew. There's obviously the hardships, like you say. And we've talked about how little money they had. That we're actually surprised in some elements that have worked really well. Despite that money, sometimes things like that actually help because you have to think outside the box. And you look at some of the sets now compared to, what it was then and all the things that they've learnt over time. What particularly impressed you about being on the set during that? Is there anything that jumps out at you being really, when you were really impressed with something?
I mean, just the main set was incredible because, it's a long time since I've watched any of the behind the scenes stuff. So I don't know how much people who weren't there know about this. So I apologize if I'm telling you stuff you already know. But the main bunk set, obviously it's a full, full wall set.
Yeah.
But that basically opened up and became every other set.
Right. Yeah.
So they only built basically 4, maybe 5 flats, and they just would piece together depending on what we were shooting. So they all clumped together and create that bunk space, and then they would pull apart, rejiggle them, and they'd become the corridor. That just was fantastic because, again, what bits and pieces I had done before then and everything, pretty much anything I've done since, you don't do that because it's a more complicated initial build. But when you've got a bit more money and a bit more time, you just build what you want. You need a living room, you build a living room. You need a kitchen, you build a kitchen. It's far more complicated to build a kitchen that swings around and becomes a living room. That's a complicated thing. You don't do that. But they did it because they just needed to tighten down the time and because they had fuck all money.
Yeah.
So stuff like that just absolutely blew me away. But to be honest, just as a fan, God, it's just I would come into work in the morning and I would walk down the corridor of Red Dwarf. I'm just I'm on the Red Dwarf. It's just amazing.
I was just, while you were talking there, I was thinking about the, just in general about sort of set designs and things that people have to cut costs on. I mean, it's not only normal television, is it? Because if you look at say Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered Country, the sets on there were the Next Generation sets. They just reused them because they had to. They reused a Klingon bird of prey being exploded because they had to. So it goes up the chain. So it's not unknown. And I think obviously with Dave being a new channel as such, and this was the first one that was done that wasn't reality or wasn't game show, wasn't it? This was the first proper drama that they did, or comedy drama that they did. How did that all kind of come around? Obviously, with Dave being in there, were people from Dave actually, UK TV actually around on the set, and did they have much of a say? Did you see much of them, or was it just literally just your crew and that was it, really?
No, not at all. I think we had one day when a couple of people came down. I seem to remember there being one day where a couple of people came down. This really nice man and woman kind of came and sort of chatted to us. But really, they absolutely left Doug alone.
Right.
They had a great deal of trust in him, which I think he also kind of manufactured. I think he wanted to be left alone.
Yeah.
That's very much how he works. But pretty much it was just us. It was just our team. There were no executives. No one was breathing down our neck. The budget was insane. The budget was ridiculous. It was tiny. That's, in part because of what I was saying about, how the original project got commissioned and where it came from and everything. But in the post-production phase, Dave was so impressed that they gave us some more cash.
Oh, right. Okay.
So there was a little injection in the post-production phase, not much. And to be absolutely honest with you, at that point, it didn't really make any difference. It just meant there were a few people, our visual effects guy basically worked for nothing.
Yeah.
He worked for expenses to come over because he used to work in Weta and he was setting up his own production company, and he was just I want to do this. And he was working for very, very little, hotel and dinner. Yeah. And I think basically that injection at the end allowed Doug to actually give him a legitimate wage and that kind of thing. And we got a huge injection of cash into our advertising at the very end. Because again, this was just going to go out. It was just going to be popped out. But when Dave did see what we'd created and what Doug had put together, all of a sudden we were having a press screening. They were taking Carbug out on tour. There was a big deal made of it. But outside of that, no, they kind of left us alone. It was... I don't think they quite realised what they were triggering.
Right. No, that's interesting.
Yeah, I don't think Dave ever saw it as this could be a new thing for us. If this goes to shit, then, nothing lost. Couple of $100,000. What's that in the grand scheme of things?
Yeah.
So I think it was really near the end that they kind of almost poked their head around the door and went, oh shit, this is something. And then of course the overnights and the viewing figures came in, and it just blew everything out of the water. It was insane, like breaking records.
Was it something like 4 million per episode or something? I think, or something, wasn't it? So
unheard of at that point.
Yeah. I mean, I remember those days well when the viewing figures were coming through and people had watched it, and it was obviously wasn't everyone's cup of tea, but at the same time it still did. And I said at the beginning of the Back to Earth coverage that without Back to Earth we wouldn't have Red Dwarf 10, so it's really vitally important as a
I
moment.
Honestly think without Back to Earth, and you know what, I'm realist. I'm not naive. I know that not everybody loved it. I know that some fans hated it. I think they're wrong, but it's like, and like I say, as a fan, I really like it, and maybe we'll chat about that in a bit.
Yeah.
As somebody who worked on it, obviously I'm hugely proud of it and really like it. And when you work on something, you have a different perception.
Yeah.
So you absolutely know what Doug is trying to do and where he's going with it, and that obviously gives you a different perspective. Yeah. But regardless of how well this particular story is loved, I think without Back to Earth, we wouldn't have the 2 and a bit series of Red Dwarf that we have since, but we also wouldn't have 3. What am I talking about? 3. We've had 3 on Dave.
Yeah, I keep forgetting 11 and 12. 11 and 12 because they'll film back to back. I keep forgetting that they.
Yeah, I do. I do the same thing because they felt like the same one. But this is it. We've got like 3 more series of Red Dwarf plus a little bit. But also, I don't think Dave would have had the balls to invest in the other kind of scripted comedy that they've done. Yeah. I think this really made them realize it was a market for it, especially with the jolly stuff that they do, kind of the remake stuff. So yeah, I think this absolutely opened up not to be grandiose about it, but I think it opened up a whole new area and era of comedy production, even if that's in big fish, small pond stuff with it being Dave. But I think it really opened up. I think Doug, did something really, really good with this. Yeah,
and obviously we're recording at the beginning of August 2023, and only, 1 week ago, they announced that BBC iPlayer, well, they didn't announce it, they put it on, but we got wind from the Red Dwarf fandom that it was coming on to iPlayer. I know Doug had been working on it for quite a bit to get that on. I think Smeg Ups is coming up on it, because I think Smeg Ups actually is one of my favourite moments. Just that video is just incredible. But the having Back to Earth on there, because I have been in Red Dwarf forums, I've seen people who have said they've never seen it because it's never been available. And we talked about that earlier with the Dave stuff, saying, well, people just change the look of it. If you weren't around in 2009, if you'd caught Red Dwarf at a later date and you weren't like pushed to get physical copies of it, it's really difficult. I haven't watched Back to Earth for a long time. I've got it sitting on my DVD rack until we were coming close to watching it, and I thought, I need to watch this. I need to rip my DVD so I can watch it again. But it's great. It's on iPlayer, and I think that it might have an interesting reappraisal with new fans. It might be interesting to see how they react to it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I also think in that kind of, in the context of watching the whole thing in a row. Yeah. Because I think that, there was a lot of pressure on it as a production, for fans who, for fans that hadn't had Red Dwarf for a while, and, 7 and 8 were not the best. I like I say, I still think there's great stuff in all of Red Dwarf. I think there's great stuff in 7, great stuff in 8. Obviously, Back to Earth maybe vibes a bit more with 7, which wasn't that popular because that came after a bit of a break and changed things up a little bit. 8 came in, tried to shift things back a little bit, but people then didn't like the backtracking. So I completely get that a lot of people didn't react that well to Back to Earth. And then when we got the sort of the Dave series, they've been a little bit more back to the formula of Series 6. So I get why people have maybe readjusted and been like, this we're okay with this. But I think for newer fans or even fans that have been away for a long time, to actually just sit down on iPlayer and watch, from episode 1 right up to, Promised Land. Yeah. I think that Back to Earth, sort of, slotted in the middle there, I think will be a more palatable watch, and I think maybe won't jar as much for people. So I think you're right. I think there could possibly be a massive reappraisal of Back to Earth, as well as maybe Series 7 and Series 8.
Yeah, and even myself, I mean, I've got to admit, I was kind of quite bullish at the beginning when we were doing our planning, and it's in the recordings. We agreed at the very beginning we're going to do it in 3 parts because it makes sense for us, because we can do it in 3-week blocks. Mm-hmm. And as we got closer and closer to the recording, all of the rest of the Shipwrecked and Comatose crew were watching the director's cut, and I'm going, we weren't watching those, we're watching the 3 parts. And it was on iPlayer, as I say, last week, so I watched it all as the director's cut. And it does meld better together, because the first episode, for me personally, isn't a great setup, just in general, just because it didn't really get any laugh from me at all. But overall, it works better as it's bigger than some of its parts, really.
Yeah.
That kind of feel to it. It has to introduce, like you say, it was meant to be an hour at one point, and it's now a 3-part structure. So it's basically a 3-act structure in some ways, which is quite good. Going to a bit more technical concept, because you talked about season 7 there, with series 7, like the shows that they've done in that, they were able to do different filming techniques. So they were able to obviously have more cameras set up and have some two-way shots and things like that, and obviously block it in a lot finer detail compared to with an audience. Thinking back now, and I don't know if you've done any audience work, but it probably was for you. I don't know how you feel about it, but it probably was for you actually quite good to see it in that environment rather than an audience participated one, or would you have preferred to have seen it in that audience style?
I've worked on stuff with audiences. I've worked on a lot of stuff with audiences, and it's fucking horrendous. Audiences are fucking I hate them. They're the worst. It's like, I love an audience sitcom. I love an audience sitcom as a viewer, but they're a fucking nightmare to actually work on, and they are so expensive. I think there's maybe, if I'm being, so just across the board here, I don't want to say anything where I'm kind of like putting words or thoughts into other people's mouths, whether that's Doug or the actors or anyone.
Yeah.
So this is my conjecture, having, worked alongside them and everything. But I think that while Doug kind of has sort of focused on the concept of the time and the budget being the reason that we didn't have an audience, I think that was only part to do with it, because we could have had an audience for some of the record. We could have had an audience, and we basically could have had an audience screener, which is what, again, I've worked on loads of things where you do that. You know the deal. You pre-record and you get the audience and you record an authentic laugh track. But Doug wasn't interested in that, because it's not what he wanted. It's like, I think it's kind of obvious for a while, that Doug has wanted to shift away from sitcom more into comedy drama. And as a fan, I like that. Like, I would have liked to have seen things shift that way a little bit more. But I think it's a tricky one. Like, when I was a teenager, I would have loved to have gone to a live record of Red Dwarf. As an adult working on Red Dwarf and working on this, close set Red Dwarf, I don't think I would have liked to have worked on a live audience show. Because with hindsight, they're not fun to work on anyway. And I got a more in-depth, almost a closer experience. I mean, there are takes. You will watch the finished product. There are takes where I'm literally stood, a foot away from Chris Barry or whomever it is. Like, I'm so close to them, observing their takes and, stifling laughter or, in taking in what they're doing. And that's an experience that you don't get on an audience, because with an audience, you basically clear off and you sort of stand at the sides and you watch on a monitor. Whereas in this, I was right there. I mean, I was physically on set for some of the takes, holding props sometimes just below camera. So it's like, that's a whole... That experience was the kind of experience that I like working in TV. But the fan in me would have loved to have gone and watched a record.
Well, moving on from that then, because not only were you slightly off camera, but you were actually on camera.
I'm on camera. I'm on camera so much. So as you can imagine, no money for extras. Literally no money for extras. So it's just the crew. Every time there's an extra seat, it's just the crew. And we were literally swapping jackets around. But I'm quite distinctive. I've got long Brian May hair.
Yeah.
I have done since I was about 12, and I still do now. And it's like there's no missing me, especially if you know me. And there are a couple of like really obvious ones. So there's an escalator that I'm stood on where I'm literally sort of pointing at camera almost. But also later on, I mean, I'm looking at sofas in the background in one scene. I'm cranking the fire in the closing scenes in the candlelit room.
Right.
Oh, sorry, but that's not on screen. You can't see me. I mean, I'm all over the place, like genuinely all over the place. Even if you can't absolutely see me, if there's any group of people on there, I got bumped out of the way about 4 different times in the chase at the end.
Oh, right. Okay.
Although interestingly, I'm sure this is all on the behind the scenes stuff, which I've not watched for ages, but for anyone who doesn't know, the extras for that last sequence, that big chase sequence, which I do think is amazing, they were all Red Dwarf fans.
Oh, right. Okay.
So a call was put out for Red Dwarf fans. Nobody got paid. But it's like, do any Red Dwarf fans want to come and be extras in this big sequence? And obviously loads of Red Dwarf fans said, we would love to. So we had loads of Red Dwarf fans. It's basically where I learned to despise Red Dwarf fans, to be honest, working that sequence. I mean, there were some lovely people. But there were
so what you're basically
that,
saying is like, don't work with animals. It's that kind of feel to it, isn't it? So Red Dwarf fans are brilliant, but just don't work with them.
Yeah, that's it. They're lovely, but don't work. And especially because I was being an extra as well, especially for like the physical stuff, because I was part of the team, so it's all right. Pushing me about a little bit is sort of okay, whereas you don't want to push around the other guys. So yeah, it's like about 3 different times I think I got pushed in different locations with different hats on. But yeah, because I'm working on it, but I'm also stood around with these guys. Completely lovely, well-meaning people, but they're all just constantly like, so what's Bobby like? And he's like, oh, so is Craig improvising a lot in this? And he's like, oh, is Chris actually like Rimmer? And I'm just like, we just got to stand here and do the take, guys. Come on. It's like fun times, but lovely, and bless them all for like traveling and like dressing up in those crazy costumes. It was like fantastic.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. So I think you were also in the bunk scene that got deleted, weren't you, when you walked past them? Because there's a little bit of a bunk scene, but
so there's a big. I loved filming that actually, because it was really, because Craig was getting really excited. We did God knows how many takes, and each time he was just getting really excited, going, "Hey Rob, it's dead. When you come in, just give me a really dirty look. Give me a dirty look. I love it." And so we were doing all this stuff, and then it gets cut out, which is like, oh man, that's my big moment. But it's a shame because it's also a really good scene.
It's a Red Dwarf scene. I said that.
It's but you know what? So I'm gonna. Doug is really good at knowing what needs making in terms of the bigger picture.
Yeah.
So there were sequences and scenes that he shot that were not intended. That it was always about having additional material.
Right.
He's really, really good at that. And we shot this bunk scene, and even when we were shooting it, he was like, this doesn't fit the flow. It's not going to be in there, but we do need content for the DVD extras. Because of course this was being shot so tight with so little money. Yeah. It's like there wasn't a lot of room. And so his script genuinely was really tight. He had everything like, boom, really tight. There was no fat on it in terms of what we were shooting. But then it's almost like he created a little bit of fat so that he could trim it, so that we could have these deleted scenes. So it's a great scene, and it's a very Red Dwarf scene. It's a brilliant scene. And it's one of those ironic things, I think, that some people will look at that and go, oh man, if that had been in it, it would have been better. And it's like, although it probably wouldn't, because it would have slowed the pacing down, but now you get to watch it in this conjecture. Yeah. Another one was my goddaughter was in a deleted scene. So there's a scene, a deleted scene where where Dave sees a little kid, and he sort of has this moment where he's thinking about, the possibility of having children and this kind of thing. For anyone who's seen that deleted scene. And that was my goddaughter. Right. Who we used to tease that she looked like Craig Charles. So it seemed quite fitting when Doug was like, does anybody have like a mixed race baby? Me. And we very coyly just kind of said, oh, actually, we sort of do.
How was his direction? How does he generally direct then? What's his kind of style when he is directing people?
the first time he was properly directing. You know, I know there was a little bit of, you know, maybe sort of remote control stuff, and you know, he and Rob got heavily involved in some of the earlier episodes and stuff. But in terms of like straight down the line, actually directing, this was his first thing. Personally, I think he was quite raw. Right. You know, the way that he expressed things, like he was very expressive. He would explain everything. And he would, you know, he was very in depth with what he wanted to do and how he wanted to do it. But sometimes I think there were things that he maybe needed to be aware of that he wasn't. He was focused very much on the script and the guys. Okay. And I think he'd put a really good team around him who were able to kind of like fill in the gaps. Yeah. But he didn't necessarily communicate the right things to the right people. But this is years ago. I've not worked with him since. You know, watching some of the later episodes, I'm confident that he's kind of like, you know, he's learned and improved as a director. He was kind of like precise and, you know, relatively calm and but just like amazing with the guys. And the thing is, they trust him like more than anything. Well, that's something we talked about in when Juliet May came aboard. That just did not suit her at all. In, you know, obviously that did, you know, obviously with Ed going and Juliet coming in, she's become a great director. But it just wasn't suited for the needs and what they do. And if you look over directors that have been, you know, given their opportunities and stuff, you know, they've all got to start somewhere, haven't they? So but it's interesting just on obviously, as you're saying, with like the concentration on the four of them. Is definitely something that I would zoom in on, because I always thought, obviously I can imagine being quite meticulous purely because of the camera setups, because it felt like he wanted to do that comedy drama in Seven and did it that way, and the blocking seems to be kind of, I always felt that was kind of what he would kind of want to take from it and maybe learn from that potentially. So that's why I was asking that question. It sounds like that's probably what he does really good. Yeah, a lot of that was very precise. He didn't. You know, that I can remember, he didn't do an awful lot of sort of storyboard and scripting work, although there were obviously storyboards. But a lot of that was really kind of worked out with the guys in the scene. But also, he knew the set, like, it was obviously there, 3D in his head. It was like, it was so precise. So, but yeah, the real work that he was doing was with them. And this was, I mean, we shot this with multiple cameras. You know, it's like when we started, there was one camera, you know, and we were shooting on Red, which at the time was like brand new, very expensive. Yeah, it's like... Yeah, I think I remember them saying they were filming it on Red. I was quite surprised by that. It was exactly, a big deal. Hugely expensive. But then after a few days of shooting, it was like, shit, we just don't have the time for this. It's worth squeezing the extra money. As far as I remember, I think one of our camera guys had his own Red camera and basically bought it in with him, right, okay. You know, gratis. And then we managed to get a third one cheap. So by the time we finished, we were shooting things with 3 setups. So the beauty of a Red camera as well is that you can shoot tons of stuff in a wide shot, and then you create your close-ups and your mid-shots and everything out of that wide shot. So when it was happening, when it was filming, Doug was filming a shit ton just in wide shots, but he would like reassure us. He'd be like, "Okay, so we're going to make a close." So it's that thing of saying to Danny, "It's like, so Danny, this is a wide shot, but we're going to take your close up out of it. So make sure you're acting, right, yeah, because we are going to cut out your." So that there was a lot of that going on, I think, with it, kind of like reassuring people that we're not shooting this how you normally would, but we're going to take these elements, so you need to focus everything down. It was really fun, actually. He was a really fun person to work with. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, no, that's interesting, because I've only just been looking at obviously Oppenheimer and with Christopher Nolan. I think it came out that he basically doesn't have a video village. He just basically does it all in camera like the 40s and 50s used to do. So not showing the dailies and not like kind of going back and looking at it. He does a lot of the camera work himself and how he directs. And you got someone like Kim Manners from the X-Files, who is renowned for his horror stuff and his interpersonal stuff that he did with Mulder and Scully, and and Rob Bowman's very much a cinematic director. He uses shadows and very neo-noir stuff and things like that. And it's
it's a different, beast being able to do that kind of thing and actually deciding which way you want to go about it. And I know, obviously, you've got directors of photography and things like that, but when people have got their own staple on stuff and, especially playing with new toys, I mean, if you look at, I think Frank Spotnitz, one of his first episodes he did in X-Files, you can tell he's got a new toy because some of the camera zooms that he's doing and, he's doing shots that's upside down on a ceiling that comes round and goes into a corridor, and then you see it and it's like, oh, what is he doing? And you look at that, and then you look at later episodes and shows that he's done. It looks great, but it wasn't great when he first did that. So, yeah, I think it's just intriguing how people develop that. And as I say, with a brand new camera and with the quality you've got with the red camera that you can do zooms, then it's a new way for everyone to work, isn't it? So I find that fascinating.
Well, this is the other thing, like you say, that the beauty of this as well is that everything that was shot was getting transferred, near instantly. So the edit suite was down the hall, and so in between takes and setups and stuff and lunch break stuff, Doug was straight down because the editor was just sat there. The footage was coming in almost live, and he was assembling, and Doug was like getting straight in there, and that really allowed Doug a sort of a freedom. I don't want to say a sloppiness because that's an unfair descriptive, but it allowed him to go, right, let's get this so that we've got it, chuck it in the edit, and then he could look at it almost instantly and go, in situ, that doesn't work. And then we do a pickup the next day or whatever. So it was a real, he was really focused on the character and the performance, but the technology, which, the whole experience to him was a new one at that time. The technology did allow for kind of a fluidity, I think, which was it was really fun to watch, actually. And because he was really proud, so he'd be like, come on, watch this, come on, watch this. And you'd sort of go in there and he'd make you watch the 3 minute that he just got set up and stuff, which is also amazing amazing sort of approach for the director to share what they're doing.
How long was the actual production from? Because obviously you had to go to Granada Studios, I would have thought, for Coronation Street, and then the set work that you've done. How long was the actual production last? So
there was one day in Manchester, and then there was I think it was 13 days. Maybe we might have. Did we squeeze up to 14? I think it was 13 plus Manchester.
Right.
I have a weird memory of us getting a cheeky extra Saturday or something along the way there. But yeah, I mean, basically the equivalent of 2 weeks. There were no break days. It was just a solid womp straight to and from, and insane really for the amount of material that was being shot. Yeah. Absolutely insane.
So I don't think there's much more unless you've got anything to volunteer, but what are any real good memories do you remember? I think you remember speaking to me saying that you were the one flying the tentacles around at one point. But is it's stuff that you could mention now?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't want to
I did this and I did that and I did that.
It's the tentacles. So there were a couple of us doing tentacles. So most of the time with the tentacles, I'm one end of most of them. Because what we did for those was literally just there was one tentacle made, and we would hold it in front of a green screen and just shake it, and then they just stuck dozens and dozens on and this kind of thing. So I'm doing the tentacles a load of the time. So the scutter.
Yeah.
So this is what I was saying about Doug and Doug being, I think, being really good at generating additional content, additional material. So for a brief period, I was going to puppeteer the scutter, or the blue screen glove, because I'd done some puppetry stuff before, and my partner kind of said, "Well, Robert can do it." It's like, okay, no problem. But then Doug kind of thought, actually, it's more fun as an extra and a behind the scenes thing if Dan does it.
Right, yeah.
Which is fair dues. So I was nearly the scutter. But I
it would have been right as well. Bob the Scutter would have been perfect.
Yeah, no, exactly. It would have fit. So that was a near miss. But I quite like the fact that Doug was able to say, that he was able to pinpoint this is a more interesting thing. If you guys watched behind the scenes and I was lying on the floor with my hand up in the air, that's not interesting. You might go, oh, is that the guy who was on the escalator? But Danny doing it's an interesting thing. And, who's to say who would have given the better performance? I couldn't possibly go there. But it's just the whole thing is a great memory. I think it's like, even today, and I've worked on a whole host of shows, it's possibly the show that I'm most proud of. Or definitely I've got 2 or 3 productions that I'm incredibly proud to have worked on. And this is one I'm so pleased to have worked on it. And I just have so many great all the stuff that we shot, the stuff on the escalator and all that kind of thing, because we were shooting that at like 2 a.m, obviously, you shut the place up. But we arrived kind of like early evening, just before the shopping centre closed. We'd been filming all day on set. And basically, I was escorting Bobby because I was looking after his banana milkshakes. And for whatever reason, the boys all wanted to travel with me. They were all going to go in different cars and stuff. But Chris had his Range Rover. And he was like, ooh, get in the back of the Range Rover. Come on, guys. So I'm in there with Bobby and Chris. And then Craig and Danny are like, no, we all want to go with Robert. Yeah. So we're kind of like driving. To be honest, I think part of it is because they all fancied my girlfriend and they just wanted to get some details. But we're kind of like driving there. And that was such a gorgeous experience as a fan. And as somebody relatively new to work in TV, to be in this car with these 4 really lovely, warm performers and really lovely, warm people who were just making me feel part of everything. And it was lovely. And then we got to the location, we got to the shopping centre, parked up, and we had the movement order with us, but we just couldn't figure out where we needed to park. And Chris is in this, he was driving this fucking massive Range Rover. So it's like, oh, we'll just go and park up here. So we sort of parked up, and I'm looking at the movement order in one hand, and I've got all these banana milkshakes in the other hand. And I'm like, well, I think we need to go through this way and up that way. And they were like, fine, let's follow you. So I'm there walking through this shopping centre with the 4 Red Dwarf guys walking behind me. And we basically just emerge into this busy shopping centre where everyone's getting ready to go home. And it's like, fucking hell. And just like walking through, going up escalators, trying to get up to this, TV shop where we're filming the sequences. But it was really surreal, but it was sort of really cool. And there was part of me was thinking, oh shit, are they going to be annoyed because they're the actors and now they're being exposed to the public and all this kind of stuff? But obviously they're not Tom Cruise. They don't have that kind of ego. And I think secretly they were really loving it because they hadn't done Red Dwarf for a while. And all of a sudden, all these people were sort of pointing and staring and going, oh my God, that's Red Dwarf. Are they doing more Red Dwarf? It's more Red Dwarf. So it was a really surreal, and from my perspective, initially I was like, oh shit, I should have taken them a different route. This is not very good. But actually it was really cool. It was a really fun, and then we sort of emerged and everyone's kind of like, hey, and yeah, that was just like, that was a really fun experience. Maybe not the most exciting story, the way that I've just told it, but it was really, really fun. Yeah. It was really warm. The whole set was really warm, actually. They are 4 of the nicest, like even today, they're 4 of the nicest, best people I've ever worked with.
Oh, that's good to hear. What about the rest of the crew then? Because obviously you didn't have much money.
Cunts, all of them cunts.
You were obviously sharing pizzas and, I'll have the olives or whatever. I'm surely that camaraderie, was that something that obviously got you through the whole production? Because you would have been quite stressful, the fact that you weren't doing it for very little and, you're doing it for the love of it, really. So I can imagine that causing quite a camaraderie between you, really.
It really was. It really was. I mean, I've worked in loads of things now, and the thing about TV and film production is that you create very close, very intense relationships very quickly. But there are always different factors that kind of feed into them. And sometimes it's, it can be where you are or who you're working with or what you're doing. For this one, it was, like you say, that camaraderie, because hardly any, lots of people were not getting paid. Nobody was getting paid what they normally get paid, but everybody was there because they just wanted to work on Red Dwarf. Like, there were people who had sort of heard Red Dwarf was coming back and had got in touch and said, look, I'll come and do it, and I'll do it for, flat rate, I'll do it for base rate, all this kind of stuff. So it really was. There was nobody there who wasn't a fan. There was nobody there who didn't. We all wanted to make the best Red Dwarf that we could. And that was really exciting, being part of that and making friends with this crew and everybody, we all sharing our Red Dwarf backgrounds, frankly, talking about the show, being fans of the show. It was really lovely to work on in that perspective. And, there were tense moments and there were, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but there was one crew member who managed to wind people up quite a lot. I won't say who or in what way, but interestingly enough, this was around the same time as that Christian Bale shouting on set clip that came out, and we felt like there were certain parallels going on there.
Was that in 2009? Bloody hell, that was ages ago.
Yeah, it's like a while ago.
Right.
But we thought we were going to get a reenactment of that a couple of times. But even outside of that, it was just such a lovely. And yeah, we there were nights where we were having to work overtime, and there was no money to pay overtime. And people were they were sort of okay with that. You get a grumble, you get a kind of, I'm not going to be home until midnight, but everybody knew what we were working on and the way it was being made. So there was no one was about to down tools. But whenever we slipped into those really, really stressful kind of lots of overtime, beer and pizza would appear. And, beer and pizza for an entire crew, especially a small crew on a project like that, money-wise, that's nothing. It costs nothing compared to what our overtime would be. But it really makes a big difference. It makes people feel appreciated. And, Doug and, all the assistant directors, my ex included, they all really made everyone feel important and part of it.
Yeah. Oh, that's good to know. So any final thoughts? We're going to talk about Red Dwarf Back to Earth in general now, just as a TV episode. So any final thoughts before we do that from your days on the set?
No, I'm maybe some other things will spring up as we chat around the episode, but no, it was great. It was really, really good. It was a really lovely thing to work on, and I'm just really pleased and really, really proud of it.
So obviously we've had the 3-part series that all the boys have done. We got all of the Shipwrecked and Comatose boys on the on those 3 weeks, but it's worth getting some further mileage out of this. So you've obviously mentioned you're actually really fond of the episode, despite obviously being on it. What do you find most fascinating with the episode itself?
Well, speaking strictly as a fan, I really liked that desire that Doug has. I really like that sort of slight shift towards a comedy drama kind of vibe. Because I think a lot of people, they come at Red Dwarf, it doesn't exclusively fall into this, but you kind of there are the fans who are sitcom fans, and there are the fans who are science fiction fans. And then they kind of meet in the middle because it's, of course, science fiction comedy. I'm a huge sitcom fan. The podcast that I do, you have been watching, but I'm a massive science fiction fan. And with Red Dwarf, what I've always appreciated about it is the quality of the science fiction, and science fiction that is sort of thoughtful and intelligent and clever. Always, usually with Dwarf, very, very funny, but it does have its moments of pathos. And I really appreciated the fact that this was shifting slightly into that comedy drama, kind of shifting away from, sort of laugh track sitcom. Because there's a lot that I like about Series 7, and I quite enjoy Series 7, without the laugh track. I think some of you get the extended episodes without laugh track. And some of those episodes I think work better. Some of the Series 7 episodes I think work better when you take the laugh track away. So just as a fan of Red Dwarf, I was quite on board with the idea of it shifting more into the realms of comedy drama. And I think that, as much, like I said, I'm realistic. I know that there were a lot of fans that didn't love this. I know there are lots of fans who do love it. And, it's not like it's universally reviled or anything. But I know that a lot of people were sort of happy when the show shifted back into more of an audience sitcom-y kind of, Series 6 kind of vibe. But for me, that was a little bit of a shame, because I think that as much as I really like Back to Earth, I think the potential of where Red Dwarf could have gone after Back to Earth would have been fascinating. And I think a sort of a full series of sort of, maybe 6 45-minute comedy drama episodes of Red Dwarf, I think would have been a really interesting next phase of Red Dwarf. So I really liked what Doug was going for this. Also, it's quite clearly like a calling card to try and make the film.
Yeah.
It's like it was very clear throughout the process of making it that he didn't want it not to look like Red Dwarf. He wanted it to still sort of fit with the aesthetic of previous Red Dwarfs, but he wanted just to inject that little oomph of cinematic mise-en-scène to it. So I love that about it.
So the sci-fi element then, if we just touch upon on that first, because obviously the homage to Blade Runner permeates right through this episode. Some people would say it goes too far and it's almost like a direct copy. And I know obviously the scenes where you were in when they're going through the running thing and they go through the glass, that was something that you have to do and be meticulous over to make sure it actually works first time. But just the idea of actually using Blade Runner as a template. I mean, what as an episode, how do you think that worked?
So overall, I think in the context of this episode, I think it works because I think that Doug is very clearly trying to suggest and imply a wider world. He's trying to suggest that kind of cinematic vibe. And I think going with Blade Runner is very sort of identifiable and kind of shifting into actual parody and pastiche, which, to be fair, Red Dwarf hasn't really done in the past. I don't think it's necessarily something that you'd want to stick with. I don't think that Red Dwarf wants to become, this episode is a parody, this episode is a parody. But there's always been homage and pastiche in the past. I think stuff like, obviously, Back to Reality, there's a very Blade Runner-y vibe to that. It's, especially once they're out and they're on the streets. So I don't think it's too much of a stretch to actually jump this up and sort of really go full throttle with it. Again, I get why people might not like it, but I also feel like, and I don't know how much of this is me watching it as a fan and me being aware of what Doug's trying to do. I think the point at which we really hit the Blade Runner-iness of it, we're kind of meant to know that it's not right at this point. Like earlier on, you're sort of basically episode 3, we're meant to think, are they in the real world? This is the real world. What is it? As soon as we start to lean towards that Blade Runner-y stuff, it becomes hyper real, and we're not really meant to. We're meant to know something's wrong. And I think, shifting wholesale into that kind of works. It's interesting. There was going to be somebody different playing the author, the architect character. Right, okay. It was a very different person, and I think it would have hit very differently. Although I thought the performance was lovely. I
know we talked about that concept, and that's interesting to know they had someone else in mind, because we actually brought that up in our conversation about whether or not it's obviously it's the creator, and could it have even been Doug at one point? Should it have been Doug? Which would have been completely meta.
But yeah, I think the sci-fi of it, I do really enjoy it. I don't think it's one of Red Dwarf's best, let's say, stories overall. I think there are better ones, but I also really hold it. I really like what he's going for and what he's doing with it. And obviously Craig's performance is off the scales. It's he's so good.
Yeah, we said that.
He's really good at it.
I mean, obviously we have to be a little bit coy because of our actual podcasters on the network. But what I particularly like, and we've talked about Craig Charles and just his acting. That scene, by the way, when they're actually at the Kochanski's grave, we did say at that time that scene looks really, really good. It's really good. So what was that? What was that setup there? Do you remember?
Oh, I mean, that was just a little bit of rostrum on a green screen. It was literally, I think we had the framing of the sort of the door frame, which again was the same door that was in the bunk room and everywhere else. It just got moved around. It was like, so we had the door frame, and then there was the sort of the platform that he walked along, but that was just like regular rostrum. And then at the end we had the little shrine built up with a few, and some pre-crew members and a couple of rimmers and stuff.
It was really effective, definitely, because we likened it to Thanks for the Memory.
Oh, sorry. That's reminded me, another place that I am, on screen. So, in the big sequence, we see the big London shot, the one that gets used in the opening credits and stuff, the big Blade Runner. There are loads of tiny little people walking around that you maybe won't realise. That was me and like half a dozen other crew members. We were just walking backwards and forwards in different ways on a green screen and then shrunk down. And that whole plate was just our VFX guy went on the London Eye and just took a photo.
Right. Oh, right. Okay. Right.
He just took a high-res photo of that and brought it back and created the whole thing. Sorry,
no, it's fine. No, it's right.
But...
no, because we were saying about that, obviously, that platform and where Lister was, acting his heart out, because it really does work for me. That it has like a Thanks for the Memory, when Rimmer used to go up to the thing, had that feel to it, and it was nice to go back to that. But also, it just goes to show, like, in later shows, the kind of the heart, all I'll say is the moonlight scene in Promised Land, that kind of thing really does work. And I think that Doug I've always said that those scenes actually are really quite pertinent to the way that Doug wants to do these comedy dramas, because he does that really, really well. Obviously, I won't go into too much detail at Promised Land because Mark and Colin, but he does it really, really well, and he does it really well here. And I think with the added bonus of knowing about the, the extra shining stuff that actually was put into this because of the director's cut of Blade Runner and, all of that stuff as well, which really helps add to it. And then the Kachansky scene at the end saying, I'm really, really brave. That whole entire arc of him is brilliant.
I love it. I love that. The Kachansky thing was amazing. It's because we had to keep that so secret. That was like insanely secret that she was coming back. We weren't allowed to. And it was really, it was really, I found it weirdly emotional meeting and working with Chloe. Because, and again, I don't want to say anything which might be, putting words into other people's mouths. And it was, it was a good decade plus ago now. But she was so lovely and so gracious, and basically had, retired from acting to go and have kids at this point. And we were sort of there waiting to do this scenes and stuff. And she was just like, I never thought I'd get asked to come and do this. And we were like, oh, why? You didn't think there'd be any more Red Dwarf? And she's just like, well, no, because people hate me. It's like the fans don't like me. I never thought they'd want me to come back and do anything. And that was actually, it sounds really, sorry, it sounds really cheesy to say it. But even now, it makes me feel really quite emotional, because sometimes we forget, don't we, as critics of things, especially things that we love and things that we might, get hyperbolic about. We forget that people are real people, and I thought Chloe was fine most of the time, but was not very well written for. She was fine in Crime Traveller, well, but not very well written for. It's like, but a lot of fans don't like her at all, just because she's not the original. And knowing that she felt that way, but also the fact that she came back to do it anyway. And I actually think it's one of her best performances. Like that little scene at the end where that you just mentioned, where Dave has his like, I'm sort of brave, and she's there and she kind of goes, you'll never get me. I think she's brilliant in that moment. And I'm sort of gutted that we've not seen her back.
We are. I think all of us have said how good Chloe is. So, do you know what? I think, again, going back to that reappraisal thing, and I thought Chloe was great when I first saw it. Not maybe so much in 7, because it was...
She's really badly written in 7.
But in 8...
It's such a bloke writing a woman. But in 8, when they make her an idiot, basically, when she becomes an idiot like the rest of them, it works a lot better.
There's like one line which I think is in 8 where... I can't remember exactly what happens, but it's always in my head that she goes, "Oh, but he promised," like that, and the line delivery is perfect. So yeah, and the crime. I haven't done the specials because I very rarely do specials. So I'm you're blessed because I'm not often on specials. But what's interesting for me is like the Crime Traveller stuff, and the lads were all saying just how good Chloe was and how it's a shame that she quit acting and things like that.
Yeah.
And I'll liken it to an X-File because Annabeth Gish, who plays Monica Reyes in X-Files part of season 8, all of season 9, she's got a fan club now, the Gishies, that just, that are fantastic people. And but at the time, everyone was totally against, you're trying to replace Mulder, you're trying to replace Scully. Annabeth Gish was kind of looked down on, said, she's not this. She again was badly written in certain elements in season 9, where she was actually better in season 8. There was moments she's brilliant, but the writing didn't really do it for her. Robert Patrick had the same thing. When he was, you're right, you can't replace David Duchovny with the T-1000. It's and as you say, people don't realise they actually are people. But then you look back on it now, and Annabeth Gish generally is actually really well loved. I'm not saying it's for the whole fandom, but most of the time they are. So it is fascinating at the time when you've got something precious like a fandom and a commodity like Red Dwarf, like an X-Files, like a Star Trek. Chris Pine, I'm sure, will have his detractors because he's playing Kirk and whatever. Zachary Quinto, and then you've got Ethan Peck doing it now as Spock. But then just having that, that the goal to do it, but then also having to take on that responsibility. And then obviously with Chloe, it's obviously taken on some from Claire Grogan, which everyone was great for. But then you look at how much work that actually Chloe's done compared to Chloe, that Claire Grogan didn't do compared to Chloe, because Chloe's been in more episodes. So it's, and she was, I think she's a great actress. So it was a shame not to see her again, really.
Yeah, I always thought she was great. And, like we've kind of said, I think Series 7, a lot changes, and it had been away for a while. So I think a lot was jarring for many fans. But especially in Series 8, I think she's really good. And it's always stuck with me, this sense that she wasn't bitter or wistful about it, but just this kind of I just thought, everyone hates me, I wouldn't be back. And I was just kind of oh man, it's I'm glad you are. I hope everyone's excited that you're back as I am.
Okay, so that was the Chloe thing, and I'd say that emotional connection between Lister and players on it, and this is why I brought this up when I said earlier today I'll put something on. It's you mentioned about Lister, and you've also mentioned about it could move to a 45-minute thing. It's something I said, and I know that I'll ask this question again to you, and I know it was fundamentally changed Lister, but this was an opportunity to maybe maneuver Lister out of this Kachansky mold and actually do something different with him. But Doug decided not to do that. We can't go into any spoiler territory, and obviously Dave, whether or not she gets mentioned or whatever that happens in the future. But the fact that for me there was I'm not saying a missed opportunity, but I could feel that. Apart from that very end scene, that you could have, this could have been a closure to the Kachansky story in some ways if it was written slightly differently.
I think that's fair, and I think that you're right. But I also think that the big factor at the time is that, from Doug's perspective, he had no idea what was going to happen next. It's was he going to get another series? Was this the last we'd ever see of these guys? Were we going to get a movie? And obviously, Kachansky in some form is more or less pertinent to have in those different, in those different scenarios. So I think you're right. I think that, especially now we're looking back at it as a sort of part of a longer series of series, and sort of in the middle of the back part there, I think it's very easy to kind of say, oh, maybe we could have done this. We could have shifted in there. We could have shifted. But I feel like at the time, it was an appropriate ending, because if that was the last we ever saw of them, this sort of slightly hopeful, I'm going to go out into the universe and maybe find the woman of my dreams, was a nice place to finish. Again, not wanting to get into spoilers for the guys in later episodes and stuff. Whether or not that is utilised most effectively in the next few series is something that I would have a much longer, more complex conversation with you. And even now, while I'm trying not to give anything away, I probably haven't.
No, it's fine. It's as long as it's ballpark. We've just done what's been fascinating recently. We've just done the Red Dwarf 10, Red Dwarf 11, and Red Dwarf 12 credits. and we've let them watch them and guess what the episodes are going to be like and what they're called and stuff. So that's coming out soon. So that was fun. That was fun to do because just some of the stuff that they were saying was really intriguing, and obviously having the knowledge is like, oh, okay, that's it. That's an interesting way to take that scene, and you've spotted something I wouldn't have spotted at that point. So yeah, that was really interesting. So you're looking at this then, the Coronation Street scenes. I mean, it's as again, we talk from a critical perspective. This is just us like looking at it, and a lot of love went into it, and we don't like look at it in that perspective going, no, look at it, it was horrible, I could do better. That's not what we think about. But it is, I do find it funny that when you get to Coronation Street, and I know it's the squid, so it's fine, that Steve sees Craig Charles as Lister and then phones Craig Charles. I was like, you're phoning him, but then he's in front of you, so what's happening there? But how did you think the Coronation Street scenes worked, and what was that like?
So I think it works pretty nicely. It's really good fun, and it's that kind of little bit of putting a lampshade on the reality of it, because especially at the time, Craig was the most high profile out of the guys. If this kind of story had been done a few years earlier, you'd have Chris on the Britass set, that's what you do. But almost by pure chance, Craig Charles happened to be in one of the biggest shows in the country. So I think it's almost like when you're doing something this meta, you can't not do that. And I think that the two Coronation Street actors that they picked, who, to be honest, they were sort of desperate to do it. It was like they really, really wanted to do it. Worked really well because you've basically got you've got someone who is basically sort of like a young woman who just thinks, what's going on? This is a bit silly. And then you've got an older bloke who the audience know that actor is a bit fucked up in real life. The audience know that he's like been an alcoholic and a drug addict and stuff. So I think it kind of works for him. If it had been one of the more clean cut actors, you wouldn't have got away with it, I think.
Well, we said this in the recording as well. I mean, not necessarily on that actor, but Craig himself, because he talks about being back in the Priory and things. It was very, very self-aware. Yeah.
Oh God, that was all him. He was the one who was like we should touch on it. We should do a joke about that. It's like it was his idea to kind of do that gag about should go back to the Priory and stuff. And because I think it's easy to forget, isn't it? Like that was so close. That was so recent. It was so raw at that point. It's a great gag, and it's kind of, I think it's quite a nice sort of humanizing, and it actually sort of helps separate a little bit the sort of the Craig and the Lister thing, especially because Lister comes out, it's like, fucking hell, that guy's a mess. Because I think that, I was going to say, Lister is a nicer guy than Craig. He's not. That's a ridiculous thing to say. Craig is just like the best. But maybe in that kind of audience perception, most people think of Craig Charles as like, oh yeah, he's a bit of a gobby scouse actor and he's been in the Priory a couple of times. But Dave is like, nice fellow and good and true. But, obviously they're both lovely guys.
The intricacies of that scene in The Rover's Return, though, it's like you can tell like which one's Lister and which one's, Craig, which is, I thought it was telling just some of the micro expressions he was doing.
No, absolutely. Again, not to wax too lyrical about Craig's acting, because genuinely, I think that the guys were all really, considering how long they'd been away from it, the guys were all on top form in this. But Craig, it's not just two Craigs. You almost realise actually how good the performance of Dave Lister has been all these years when you suddenly see, Craig being Craig. Because they do move and react and seem different. And, the sort of the Coronation Street Craig did feel more like the guy that I was, talking to, in the dressing room with this kind of thing. So I think it's a great sequence. And I think it's, considering the narrative, the style of the story, what is being done, I think an awful lot hangs on that. And obviously that was like, I was thinking about it before, like Doug, there's a little bit of the Tom Cruise about Doug, and I will explain that. But in a Mission Impossible movie, Tom Cruise, he does a halo jump. And then when you watch it in the film, it's like he's filled it all with CG and he might as well have done it on a green screen anyway. But doing a halo jump is promo for the film. So before that film, all we hear about is halo jump, halo jump. We see behind the scenes stuff, halo jump, halo jump. And so doing a halo jump is less about how well that serves the story, and it's less about how effective that is to get the final shot that you need. And it's more about saying, come and watch this because we did a halo jump. And I think that actually Doug does that a few times in this. And the Coronation Street scenes, I do think they work really well in story. But there was also a big kind of push of this like, oh my goodness, Craig Charles meets Dave Lister on the Coronation Street set. And that's a big thing. It's a talk about thing. It's it turned up in the press. It was if they just met Craig Charles in the Ivy or something, that would be nothing. But it's like Craig Charles on the set of Coronation Street. It's funny and meta and all this kind of stuff, but that's a huge promotional thing to hang this production on. And I think Doug does that a few times. This was his halo jump.
Oh, brilliant. I like the connection. I do like the connection. You talked about the car as well. We can't not talk about the car. That is certainly an interesting car. I believe that the keys were lost at one point and they had to break into it.
Oh God, I think the keys got locked in it at one point. I'm trying to remember now. There was a point that we couldn't find the keys. I mean, it was ridiculous. I mean, again, budget wise, it's like we couldn't afford that. Doug bought that car. Doug paid to have that car made out of his own pocket. And it's all flower pots and LEDs, and it's absolutely not road legal. It's horrendous. But obviously we didn't film it on any actual roads. Everything was closed set stuff. The seats had to be ripped out in order for the four guys to sit in there. So they're all, like I think it's Chris and Bobby are just kind of like squatting in the back. It was hot. It was sweaty. It was horrendous. But it was so fucking cool. It's like we all loved it so much, and it's goofy and it's silly, but it was just a really fun, silly thing. And I was talking about the camaraderie on set, and I'm aware that sometimes there are TV shows and there are films that you come out of them, you're thinking that was okay, but I think they had more fun making it than we did watching it. I wouldn't necessarily put that label onto this, but we had so much fun with the car bug. It was just such a cool, goofy prop that was also horrendous and falling apart and held together with tape. It was just really silly, but yeah, a really elaborate, expensive, unnecessary prop.
But that's the beauty of Red Dwarf in general, isn't it? It's things like that.
Exactly. It's all about it.
Either you make something really shacklety. Like one of my favourite scenes is, I think it's in Camille where where Crichton's doing the exam in Starbug, driving exam, and Rimmer gets shot out, and he can see that the wire turns up, it's the action figure that comes out, and I love that. I think that's just brilliant because it's cheap, it's cheerful, it's funny because it's just like sort of that you can see what it is.
There's a kind of
it's brilliant.
There's a getaway with it.
It's brilliant.
Well, so Doug had a mantra on this. So I actually think Back to Earth looks amazing. Like genuinely. And I know with hindsight, you can go back and you can look and go, oh, that's a bit cheesy and stuff. But I think especially with the budget that we had at the time, I think most of it looks amazing. The scene you were talking about, the memorial garden, I think that's incredible. I actually think all the stuff with the hangar where the water pool, all those wide shots, I think, considering that was entirely blue screen, we just had I think it looks really, really nice. The Leopard lager machine does not look very good, but the rest, it's a weird one that doesn't look. But the rest of the corridor looks nice. And
we mentioned about the shot though. The shot's really nice. Being outside of Red Dwarf, and that's something I'd say cinematic. In general, that whole thing, even though you can tell it's computer generated, up until him kicking or stomping on the leopard thing, doesn't really work. But it actually is a good shot. It's a well compensated shot.
Well, this was the thing that Doug kept saying, and the boys kept saying, and our visual effects guy kept coming back to, is that the standard, the comparative standard for Red Dwarf was always Doctor Who. And we kept coming back to the fact that the original series of Red Dwarf, even when Red Dwarf was on and Doctor Who wasn't, Red Dwarf had to look as good as Doctor Who. And for the most part, it did. And in some respects, it looked better.
Definitely.
But for this one, it was like, okay, this needs to look as good as Doctor Who now. It can't look... And I know some people, they love the shonkiness of the old series, but I think that the shonkiness of the old series works in context. And so it was very much, we have to have a contemporary verisimilitude almost. And this has to look as good as Doctor Who, at least within our budget. And for the most part, I genuinely think it does. I think some of this CG, you can sort of hold it up with similar shows of the time. So I think for the most part, I think it looks great. I really like how it looks.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying by things you learn. I mean, obviously Peter Ragg and the like, it was on Doctor Who, wasn't he? So, but actually being able to develop that over time. I mean, my background that you might be able to see right now is the Red Dwarf 10 set. It looks incredible.
Yes.
It's just like, it's an amazing so set. And, for them to go from where they were to where they are now, and even like 11 and 12, there's different variations on stuff. There is some CGI, which is a bit like, not quite thing on that. The models came back. The model work has always been amazing on Red Dwarf. So, and stuff like that, it really works. And like, as you say, with the map, the picture taken on the London Eye with showing the actual Tyrell's Tower, the British version was good, and it looks really smart. It really does. So I think, you're right. I think the production-wise, considering what they were doing, yes, it's going to be a bit wonky. It's just ridiculously good.
The money we had was just insane. It's like, I mean, well, that's the other thing, though, isn't it? I mean, I know I keep saying it, but we didn't really pay for that. It's like if it had looked as good as the budget would allow, it would have looked absolute shit.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's like, and it looks way better. Like if we'd had, it's almost like if we had the amount of money in the budget that it would have cost to make it look as good as it did, it would have looked even better. If that makes sense, because of how well that money was used and spread around.
That was another thing, actually. So just going back to some more practical stuff, because you had the bus scene as well with the two kids with Craig Charles on there and Lister on there. And again, that was like, I think I likened it to like, you've got 3-part structure. You've got Lister in the memorial, you've got Lister on the bus, and you've got Lister at the end. And those are the 3 things that thread the entire hour and a bit. But again, that scene was great. And even before that, I mean, we're focusing a lot on Lister, but the Rimmer stuff as well, if you want to make some comments on that with Katerina and then her demise, so there's those 2 scenes together, really. I'd like, maybe you want to say something about them.
Yeah, I mean, I know you said that you're not so keen on the first episode or the sort of the first act. And I appreciate that, especially because I suppose to a degree that's all on the ship. And so maybe it's easier to compare it to other, golden era Red Dwarf. I completely get that. But I love the Katerina stuff. I really like that character and the stuff that she gets to do with Rimmer. That feels very old school Red Dwarf to me. This kind of competition, and Rimmer's sort of trying to show off a little bit, and but also is a bit intimidated, and there's the whole thing where he's kind of like, oh yes, Crichton's on a holiday. I insisted he go on a holiday so that he'd be more refreshed. And she's like, why you'll send Mick on holiday? He's Mick. It's like all that kind of stuff. I think is really, really fun, and her performance is great. Like she sort of slotted in really nicely. Behind the scenes, all those close-ups of her hands when she's doing stuff, that those are my ex's hands.
Oh, right, okay.
But yeah, I really like the sort of her being thrown under the bus, because I think that we almost needed a little moment to come back to Rimmer and then sort of the other guys, because we'd been focused so much on Lister. I was saying about the scene with Lister seeing a baby, although I think that was never really intended to be in the script. That would have come before that, and so I think that would have created too much Lister. So it was nice just to have this little jump back to Rimmer, and also I feel like watching it as a fan, I think it's just that slight suggestion that something's not quite right as well, because the fact that she just sort of pops up and he just sort of kills her and moves on. It's just, I think that's where things start to get a little bit weird outside of their initial concept. And then that whole line where Bobby's like, "Oh, she didn't see that coming," which was one that he sort of improv'd on the day. But it's a lovely, I really like that scene. I really like it. And the whole thing of like, you've got a TV channel named after you, and it's like, yeah.
Well, the thing earlier in the episode, I know we're jumping around, but this is my style. Mark will tell you this is my style. I quite like talking around. But the Katerina, I mentioned this in recording, that the scene at the end of the first episode where she's building the concoction has lens flares. It's quite high quality. Quite a high quality montage scene that was done really well, and I actually really liked that scene because I think it was well put together, and it was filmed in such a way that it actually really, really worked.
Yeah, I mean, I think, to be honest, I think that was one of those, we talk about virtue out of necessity and that kind of thing. It's because literally it was right at the end of the day and they just had to like sling it together.
Right, yeah.
Didn't really have a proper set or anything. So it's just kind of all shot in kind of like close-ups and lights and stuff. And like I say, all the stuff with the hands was shot a week later just to fill in the gaps because we only had her there for like a couple of days to film. So, but yeah, I think it's a really nice sequence. And maybe that's part of the reason that first episode, for yourself or for others doesn't quite gel, because it towards the end it kind of cranks up quite cinematically. I think we open up with a lovely cinematic shot, like you say, and then we get some very Red Dwarfy stuff of the ironing the sneeze and that kind of thing. It's all very silly, Doug trying to give us the mundanity of it all, and Rimmer.
Yeah, well, talking about silly, while we talked about this in episode 1, Matt Latham worked out the exact Argos catalogue that they used for the Dummies guide.
Oh, no, well, it will have been whichever one.
Yeah, he actually worked it out. He went on to the computer, disappeared for about 10 minutes, didn't talk, and said, "While you've been talking, I've worked out that it's the, spring, summer 2008 Argos catalogue." So I was like,
yeah, that would fit in terms of when we shot, because I think we shot in May.
So it worked it out. So you saying about things like hands and stuff like that, don't worry. Do not worry on this podcast. It doesn't make a difference. We talk about Argos catalogues. But we did like the attention to detail. What we said about the bunk scene was how well it was put together. Like you say, with the flats that you've got on there, and obviously the way it was designed, so it was a set more than actually like a 2-camera shot. The attention to detail, it was like a lot of the detail was more from the books than it was from the show. So we thought that was quite good.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like the art department had, some of the books like Cannibal, pages stuck up in places. Because I think that, and again, this is me, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but I think that Doug was trying to use this as an opportunity to segue more into his own personal view of Red Dwarf and the Red Dwarf universe, in line with those books. And I think, let's be fair. I mean, like, best case scenario, he was probably hoping this might lead to a movie. And I think there was definitely a kind of a push towards that. The detail was fantastic. I mean, like you say, the set on the most recent series is insane with detail. It's like crammed with physical detail, whereas the set on Back to Earth, I think, was quite a simple set when you really break it down, quite a plain set, but I think it had a lot of artistic detail. So whereas the current series, I think there's loads and loads of physical, visual detail. There's little nooks and crannies.
It's 3-dimensional, isn't it? Yeah, everywhere. It's actually a lot of it. It's a busy set. But I think Back to Earth just was artistically, I think it was the right side of busy and the right side of simple. I think it was, but like I say, everyone was just like bringing their A game for their B game money. So jumping around again, when we do get to the Blade Runner stuff, and before they get the car, there's that Frozen scene, with the nose segment.
Oh yeah,
which was good, and that set looked really well, and I think that was a reused set as well, from what I remember. I think there was something else that was used for that area was used for something else. But yeah, I thought that particularly worked. And obviously that guides you to Coronation Street, because he's the one that obviously points him in that direction. So again, considering the money that they had, the fact that they can produce those type of sets and actually have an actor of that caliber as well, because I think he'd been on, from what we've remembered, was he on like loads of Jackie Chan films and things like that? So,
oh god, yeah. He was really. I've just forgot his name because it's a long time ago and I'm old. Yeah. But he was really, really cool guy, and yeah, he'd like done just like a ton of stuff. He was one of those. He's one of those guest stars that Doug wanted for him. Like it sort of didn't matter if anyone else knew who he was. Like Doug really sort of wanted him. He was really, really cool guy. I don't think he really knew what was going on.
His role was good. Nice little link in with that whole thing. And I think in the kind of squid element with like the cats kind of doing all the papier mâches and stuff, I'm sure the art department were just providing that for him. But the cat didn't really have a lot to do in this show at all, really, did he? He gets a little bit towards, obviously at the very beginning where he comes out from nothing, but he's the instigator of it because he brought the baby squid along. But other than that, there's not a huge amount that Cat does in these 3 episodes, is there?
No, not really. And it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because when you look at Red Dwarf across the board, it's like obviously Lister is the kind of the main focus and Rimmer is the kind of secondary focus. And then Crichton and the cat are kind of backup characters a lot of the time. But then in any 6-episode series, you can have an episode that kind of focuses on the cat, or Crichton gets a chunky B story that feeds into the A story, that kind of thing. Of course, this is very different. Although it's 3 episodes, it's one story, and it's a Lister story, and Rimmer gets some good stuff, I think, particularly near the beginning. But Crichton and the cat are basically sort of doing the Crichton and the cat thing. And I think there's some great, Danny's just like insane in this. He's so fun. And I think there's like a real kind of like series 1 and 2 kind of cat vibe to him, but he doesn't get much to do. They sort of flag it up a little bit. The gag about the gag about him complaining about not getting any lines. Yeah,
because I was going to ask about that in general, because obviously you've got the cat saying that, and you've also got Rimmer saying, "Give me a sitcom." Which is like, yes. Yeah, we definitely picked that up on that scene with the creator. I thought that was particularly a good scene. That actually, if we move to that scene, because as you say, Kat didn't have much to do there, but that whole scene was very meta. We definitely got caught that.
No, it was great. I love that, and because Danny, again, they're all great guys, but out of the 4 of them, Danny's the one who complains about not having lines. Like none of the others really complain. To be fair, sometimes he has his lines. You'll be on set and Doug's kind of like, oh, actually, let's give Rimmer this punchline because it makes more sense. But then he also flips around and, he'll give a setup line to the cat that would have been with Crichton or whatever it is. But Danny's the one but it's a lot of it's that kind of like the banter of the camaraderie. He will complain a lot about not having enough lines, but I don't know to what extent he really means it. But the scene where they kind of like pinpoint it is great. But yeah, he doesn't get an awful lot. Like you say, he kind of tops and tails it. And then has a couple of like good moments in between, but he never has anything like, Rimmer's throwing Katerina under the bus, or even Rimmer's kind of like hallway scene with Katerina. The cat never really has anything like that. He doesn't even have, I was going to say he doesn't really have like, when Rimmer's kind of like listening to his music while they're being attacked, but actually the cat's being attacked in that scene. So he does kind of, but yeah, he probably gets the most short thrift in this, I think. And because Bobby gets to do plenty of exposition with Crichton.
Yeah, and Rimmer gets the scene when they're actually in the diving bell, doesn't he? Where he's kind of just milling around. He's not really paying attention.
Yeah, which is great fun, sort of like Rimmery scene.
Yeah. So in that back end of the scene then with the creator, and obviously they want more life. I'm going to sneeze now. That they get more life. after I sneeze. That it develops into like a Red Dwarf slapstick, which I've done before in the past. And I think one of the things, and it's not necessarily a criticism, because we've talked a lot about moving into comedy drama, is it's a very brave thing for Doug to do, but it's also quite a double-edged sword, because you've got to get that balance right. And sometimes, obviously, the balance doesn't always land, because it's like, is it trying to be one thing, but it's neither at the same time? So there's a balance there that we felt there was a bit of a little bit of an issue there. But the slapstick stuff, I mean, slapstick stuff tends to work. I mean, the whole Simpsons thing with Crichton getting his broom smashed in his face and Rimmer like being thing. But I did like the concept actually of the whole thing of, listers rewriting their history and they're actually listening to it. I thought that, and the typos, because I am absolutely famous for my typos, because I could not write a sentence without having a typo in it. It's just ridiculous. But that kind of last act in that area was an interesting way of going about it, because it was almost like it was sketchy compared to, say, something that was maybe a bit funnier earlier on, that could have actually been in there and maybe ramped things up, like for the end of the first episode, for example, where you could have really gone for more of a ramped up action piece. They went more for the slapstick humor-y kind of thing, which I thought was an interesting choice.
Yeah, well, it's a tricky one, because I think that, and again, some of this might be getting skewed by working on it and kind of like listening to Doug's rationale as we were making it. But I think the sort of the slapsticky stuff in that scene, without sounding perverse, it's almost meant to be part of the dramatic narrative, because it's meant to be what Lister thinks is funny. So it's less about Doug trying to make us laugh at home at the ha ha ha, they're getting hit in the face. And it's more about making us laugh at Lister doing what he thinks is funny. But also the big action scene, the chase and the through the glass and all this kind of stuff. And I don't know to what extent this worked or not for people watching it. But especially because little bits of that were used in the title sequences, because obviously the Dwarf title sequences, in this particular case, with it just being one story in 3 episodes, you almost get that Mission Impossible thing where you're seeing a trailer for the later part of the story. Doug was hoping that would be almost like a fake out, like people were expecting this big dramatic action finale, but actually that's just a guy describing something early on, and then we go for a more quiet. I think you're right. I think like whether it works or not, or whether they could have done something more, but basically something funnier. But I think, sorry, there's a really loud aeroplane just gone over me now.
I can't hear it, but it's fine.
So it's like if it's not being picked up by my mic, then I just sound like I'm losing my mind now.
It might pick up on your mic when I get your recording, though. So
yeah, that's it. You probably hear it here. It's like it's Doug. He's trying to shut me up. But yeah, I mean, I think they could have gone a different route, but I think it was really just explaining. Because imagine if Rimmer had sat down to write things first, he might have just written the other 3 out of existence straight away, like boom, and he'd be an officer in seconds. Whereas Lister, it's like, what's the first thing that Lister thinks of? Oh, I know, I'll get Rimmer to smash his balls on the table.
I suppose, because here's a question for you then, because we picked up on the very first part of the episode, at the very beginning, where, we feel that Kochanski kind of left. Crichton obviously covered it up, but Kochanski left because she was kind of bored of Lister doing this, like becoming kind of down and out, and and finding the tomato joke and the sneezing on it and stuff like that, which is just, he's gone so far down the rabbit hole that he's not like any zest to life at all. And then you look at the final scene. So I can see what he's trying to do there, because it's breaking reality at that moment, obviously, with the vase and stuff like that, because they know they're not in that world, and they know they're not, they're in the real world, and he doesn't want to leave that, but he's also revitalized at the same time. So I can see the progression between him being absolutely down and out, crying at the memorial, thinking Kachansky's dead, where Kachansky's really got you can't get out of this mode. I've had enough of you. I need to leave because all I can see is you going down this spiral and you're not doing very well. And this gives him the revitalization for it. So from that perspective, I do see that, and it's making me reappraise that end scene a little bit more with what you're saying. If that's Doug's desire on that, maybe it doesn't come across as well as it could have, but I can see it where it's coming from. I definitely see it more at the very end with Kachansky, but that middle bit, I can see maybe a bit more than maybe I did beforehand.
It's tricky, and it's like, I said at the top of this, I do genuinely really like this as a fan, but I also have a very specific perception of it as having worked on it. And as much as I keep echoing that I don't want to, I'd hate to seem like I was speaking on behalf of Doug or any of the performers or creatives involved. My perception, having worked on it, leads me to feel certain things and take certain things. And, expressing those to other people doesn't necessarily mean that they should change, what they think or how they perceive it. And I think that also comes down to how well Doug made it. Like I say, I think directorially, maybe editorially, I think that, he was a bit green here. And I think there are moments where I get what he was going for because he kind of told us. And even watching it, I can kind of see what he's going for, but it doesn't always hit. It doesn't always. Whereas I think in the later series where he's kind of got better, I think there are certain moments in certain episodes where he kind of hits similar beats, and I think that they do land more effectively.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I think that's the nature of television anyway. I think, there's X-File episodes that I've seen that, when we've talked to people or you listen to episodes or even speak to actors behind the scenes and how they developed a set and how they said, we had one scene in one episode which got cut, which you can find on YouTube, but it would have really have told you what I was trying to do in that second scene. So that's the nature of television, isn't it? That's just, you've got to sometimes cut your darlings because of things. And, it's like when, I think I alluded to it somewhere in some podcast that I did, but, storylines, 26 episode seasons where somebody isn't in anymore, or they killed that person off. Well, you don't know that they killed that person off because they got another show which they went to, which didn't do very well, but then they went over to this thing and then they ended up working on Walking Dead or something, and that was just their path. You can't keep people on a contract. So, there's technicalities like that deal with it. And obviously, someone's thought, on how they create something, we can look into it. We've probably looked into Red Dwarf totally completely different to the way somebody might have accepted it, but it's what you take from it. And I think that's what art's about. That's art at the end of the day. You can make it for yourself, but then other people might see it as something different, which is great in a lot of ways.
That's absolutely it. You've got it completely on the money. And there are going to be, using this obviously as the example because it's what we're talking about, there are going to be moments where Doug strikes it and everybody perceives it generally the same way. And there are going to be moments where he doesn't maybe hit the mark. And some people kind of see it, some people don't see it, some people like it, some people don't like it. Perception is the hugest part. How we perceive art and how we experience other people's art can be so detached from how they intend things to be. And I think, as people get better and as somebody like Doug gets better at, at writing and killing his darlings and this kind of stuff, as he gets better at all of that, whether we would argue that universally his art is getting better, whether the episodes post this are better, that's still debatable. It's still up for debate, but you can see objectively where he's better now, or this works better now, and then it all comes down to the sort of the personal perception outside of that.
Absolutely. Munchkin Rimmers, I absolutely loved them. I remember at the time watching them and howling with laughter. It was the most memorable thing that I remember seeing on screen when I watched this the first time round. I loved those Munchkin Rimmers.
Well, that was kind of heartbreaking because we had these two kids come in. These two little kids who came in to film it, and they were so So they were so excited, and they worked really wonderfully, and they were really, really good, and they took direction really well. They had no idea that their faces were going to be completely taken out of it. And then afterwards, they found out that they weren't actually in it. They were just like,
Oh no.
So yeah, it's a heartbreak.
Oh dear.
Those poor kids. Because they'll be adults now, and they'll be at university bitter about it.
Remember that time Red Dwarf? Yeah, I remember it well. Don't talk about it. Yeah, oh, bless him. Well, that's briefly. Well, not briefly. We've been on for 2 hours, but that's pretty much all I've got to say. Unless there's something in the episode, because obviously I've just gone over it quickly, really, because of, well, not quickly, but you know what I mean. I've gone over it in no fine detail. But is there anything else in the episode that you particularly like with Back to Earth as a fan, as a viewer? I
mean, as a fan, I really like that guy with the long hair on the escalator. Yeah. Like, he's really good. He's
really good actor. His pointing is just really on point.
But no, I mean, we've kind of covered a lot, and I'm not going to give, sort of like bore people with like a huge long review of my own. And I know you guys have got your big review coming on that you've done and everything. So, there are things that I love about it as a fan. There are things that even stood on set watching it, I was like, maybe do that a little bit different. I kind of like the return of the squid. I think particularly because it was this may be our last shot. I was kind of happy with that. I think Doug, on that production. Sorry, right. I'm trying to be coy now. On that production, I think there were maybe one or two people who were giving Doug advice about what the fans would want, who I don't think were necessarily giving him the best advice. And I will say no more about that. But I actually think that, it's difficult when you try to give the fans what you think they want, but also trying to give them what you want to do.
Well, that becomes a bit of an issue, isn't it, nowadays? Because obviously social media is so full on that, people get upset no matter what you do. And to be honest, if you look at the actual fandom, the most vocal are probably the people in the minority. So, if you're playing to like sort of your general fan base, it's probably at least 80% of them. And then you maybe got a 5% like real rabid fans. And then you've got, another 5% that like have an opinion, or someone like us who would have our opinions on the podcast and whatever. But, but the majority of people, or even just casual watchers, they're not bothered. You've got to kind of really stick with what you want to do in some ways. And, so.
Yeah, I think you do. I think Doug was quite, I quite like the fact that Doug was, he did want to give what he thought the fans wanted, but he wanted to give them what he thought they wanted his way. And I think that he wasn't necessarily always getting the best advice from certain people. I think that he still made something really nice. And it's a good product. And we've talked about, watching it, whether it's going to get a reappraisal, watching it in a through line. And I think that's a big factor with this, because I think at the time, you could have watched it and gone, oh, they've done the squid again. I wanted something fresh and something new. And you could also go, oh, they've done the meta. They've done the, because it's not a new concept, is it? Characters wake up and realize they're in a sitcom. That's, everybody's done it. And in the grand scheme of Red Dwarf episodes, it's almost an obvious one. It's like, oh, why have we not done this before? But when you're looking at it thinking maybe this is the last time you'll ever have, I can understand people thinking, I wanted something a bit fresher. But I was actually really excited. Sorry, I'm going off again now. But I was really excited when I first came on it, because Doug's obsession with this was, and you know what you're saying about the scene at the end with Lister writing on the typewriter and stuff. Again, not particularly original. But obviously lots of people compared this to the League of Gentlemen, because their film came out not long before this. I don't think Doug has ever seen that film. But what he was obsessed with on this was Animal Man, because Richard, his son, had some Animal Man comics, and Doug had read them and was like, I love this. This is amazing. This is what I want to do with Red Dwarf. And I was a big Animal Man fan. so that was really cool. Like he had like copies of Animal Man like in his office and this kind of thing. So that was a really exciting one for me as well, to see that that's where he was getting his, drawing inspiration and ideas and stuff. But yeah, it's not the most original idea, but I quite like the fact that Red Dwarf did that. And other people's mileage will vary, but I'm quite happy that, now that we've got several series afterwards, I'm quite happy that this story is one.
It's an interesting chapter, even if, as I say, and it doesn't fall. I don't think it falls under the worst episode of Red Dwarf by Ganymede and Titan either. So it doesn't come under the worst episode ever. So that in itself is good. So and it is different, and as I say, it is vitally important to the Red Dwarf universe. And I'm glad now that people can get eyes on it. When I heard it was coming on, I was like, at least people can get their eyes on it, because I will, on occasion, or probably most times, like I said before, I fancy putting Trojan on Red Dwarf 10. I fancy putting, I don't know, Gun of the Apocalypse on, or Back to Reality or whatever. But then sometimes I'll just end up sticking Red Dwarf 1 on, and before you know it, I'm in Red Dwarf 3, and I'm going, actually, I'm watching this in order, because it is my nighttime television watching. It's like when I don't want to watch anything, if I've got a spare half an hour, getting ready for bed or whatever, it's like, I'll put a Red Dwarf on. It's my comfort blanket. And obviously now I've got Back to Earth in the middle of it, I'll probably will watch it more times than I'm used to watching it. So, which is a good thing. Yeah,
absolutely. Especially the director's cut, which I think is a stronger watch.
Oh, definitely. I mean, as I say, with us doing it, because it was a 3-piece thing, we were going to do it separately because we kind of discussed that. But at the same time, it does cohere so much better as a 1-piece. Definitely. Right. Okay. I went onto my Facebook Messenger group with the boys, and I stupidly said that you were on today. I said, I'm interviewing Rob in 2 hours. And Matt Latham, I said, have you got any questions for him? Matt Latham said, would he rather fight a duck-sized elephant or an elephant-sized duck?
Oh, a duck-sized elephant, obviously. And just kick it out of the way.
And then Colin went, Rob Grant, ? Because I said, I'm interviewing Rob. And they just instantly went, are you interviewing Rob Grant? No, I'm not, sorry. Yeah, and then they go on to talk about all different things. Matt does actually start to ask proper questions. So he says, I know he's quite a defender of the Dave series on Back to Earth, though he did work on it. So I'd quite like to get his overall non-spoiler thoughts leading up to the next year of the shows, as I think he'd be a bit more positive than some internet commentary I've seen online. I think we've kind of talked about that, haven't we? You generally, you enjoy it. To
be honest, we have. I mean, to sort of to touch that question ever so slightly, Promised Land, I actually got a little bit excited about it because, like I said, I would have been more keen to see a series that more heavily stuck to the Back to Earth kind of format. And I think that Doug jumped back to the more traditional format, a little bit like he did with Series 8, to sort of appease people and to keep things going. But Promised Land feels like maybe a bit of a compromise. It's sort of, these kind of like 90-minute sitcoms, doing one of those every couple of years. Who knows? I think that would be a really interesting way forward, because I'm happy if we don't have 6-part 30-minute Red Dwarf sitcom anymore. But I also want more Red Dwarf, and I'd be, that kind of, maybe this compromise format would be my...
Well, I had this exact conversation earlier this afternoon. I was recording an episode for my Make It So podcast, the Star Trek podcast, and with the writer's strike and the actors' strike that's going on at the moment, with the way that Disney and everyone's like sort of siloed themselves off, so you've got Paramount, you've got Disney, you've got Lionsgate, you've got, HBO's kind of doing its weird thing. And then they're cutting all these shows now because they can't afford it, doing his write-offs, and they've got the AI technology and all that type of thing that's happening. And a lot of things are going. And I do think that Star Trek will eventually do what you've just said. And Red Dwarf might be doing the same, because there's a Section 31 TV movie going to be released with Michelle Yeoh. So I do think that because of the way that the streaming landscape has kind of turned on its head and imploded on itself recently, that might be the format that a lot of things go to now. That you might not see as many 10-part shows, or they might distill them down to like a few rather than like 50,000. but you might start seeing things like Star Trek doing one-off hour-and-a-half movies, and I think Red Dwarf would be a perfect example of that.
I think you're right, and I think that's always been slightly more of a UK kind of format anyway. Like, you know, you look at stuff like Sherlock, you know, 3 films, 90-minute episodes. You look at Inspector Morse, they used to be like, you know, 2-hour episode. You know, it's like but, you know, shorter series. So I think you're right. It feels like American TV over the last 30 years has been slowly shifting more towards the pattern of UK product, you know, shorter series, you know, more focused writing teams. And I think that's a nice space for Red Dwarf. I think that's what I'd like to see. We're never going to get a Red Dwarf movie. We're never going to get a Red Dwarf cinema movie. That window is closed. But the idea of every couple of years, Dave produces a 90-minute, you know, 2-hour with breaks, Red Dwarf story. I'd love that. That's kind of what I'd like to see as the future of it.
Yeah, that's what I would hope to see as well. I think that's probably the way we're going. And hopefully, as we've seen online and things, that, you know, things are starting to move now in the Red Dwarf world. Red Dwarf HQ has been taken out, and Doug's just tweeting out Red Dwarf stuff now, which we won't go into, you know, thoughts and what might be happening behind the scenes there. But, you know, there is some compromises happened. There has been some announcements saying that things are moving forward now, at least in a forward direction. So we'll watch this space and see what happens. And part of the reason why we're starting to scurry a bit is that Mark and Colin, if anything does get announced and does come out within the next year or so, then we want to be there live when it's there, and they want to see everything up to 12. So some of the specials that Mark's doing, surprisingly, have disappeared for a little bit. They've definitely reduced in scope compared to what they were 6 months ago, put it that way. Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your insights, Robert. It's absolutely a pleasure. I'm sure that most people listening will enjoy those insights, because it is a little peek behind the curtain. And thank you for saying what you can. And obviously, you know, whatever happens behind the closed doors, obviously, you know, we respect that. But if people were wanting some more of you, like, so I'd say the Britcom stuff or anything you're up to, where can people find that online, and where can they find you?
Well, the best place to find me is always on Twitter. That's my social media spot, where I am Forducks, which is FORDUCKS. Whatever I'm working on, whether it's my own podcast or guesting on something like yours, I promote it out there. But generally speaking, on the We Made This network, I host You Have Been Watching, a British sitcom podcast. We're on a slight hiatus at the moment, but we've recently recorded a couple of really nice episodes that we're going to put out there soon. But if you've not listened to it, you can go there now and you can listen to all our previous episodes and bring yourself up to speed. And it's we don't talk about Red Dwarf because you guys are kind of doing that, but we do. It does come up quite a bit, as you would imagine. So, yeah, if you've enjoyed anything that I've had to say about sitcom today, go and check that one out.
What other projects have you been on that's been on telly recently? Because there's been a couple of things that you've been involved in, hasn't there?
Oh, my goodness. Well, I mean, it's like, Live at the Apollo is like my, you know, sort of like my paying my rent. So I'm always live at the Apollo. Go on, man. What? I mean, the How Europe Stole My Mum was a great one. I did a couple of years ago. That's really worth watching. Kieran Holden did. That's fantastic. Lots of pilots that you can't watch, which is a shame, because they're always the best. Always have the biggest arseholes in them. You check out my IMDb if you really want.
Right. Okay. Well, you can find me on Linktree on linktr.ee /R-Moldrake. It's RMULDRAKE. If you're looking for the podcast, then at Twitter or X or wherever it's called now, currently at Red Dwarf Pod is the best place to find us. But until next time, remember, as always, Shipwrecked and Comatose, a Red Dwarf podcast, was created and produced by Mark Adams and Kurt North. You can find us on Twitter at Red Dwarf Pod, and we are part of the We Made This Podcast Network.
Are you a fan of the Marvel Universe?
Can you tell your Kang from your Doctor Doom?
Well, if so, boy, do we have a podcast for you.
Podcast 616 is the We Made This Network's long-running Marvel podcast, and it's under new management.
We're your hosts, Ashley Thomas
And Hugh McStay.
and together we are going to lead you every step of the way through the Marvel Cinematic Universe's upcoming multiverse saga.
Everything from She-Hulk to Avengers Secret Wars will be covered on the podcast in the kind of detail that would make a Wikipedia article blush.
We're going to have some detours into the wider Marvel world where we'll look at non-MCU projects dating all the way back to Marvel's origins in the groovy, funky 60s, and all the way up to the birth of the greatest franchise in cinema history.
And we'll be joined on our adventure by a roll call of guests so impressively knowledgeable that they'll make the Avengers themselves look clueless by comparison.
So if you like your opinions sharper than Wolverine's claws,
Or takes hotter than the Human Torch's underpants.
then get Podcast 616 in your ears as a matter of urgency.
You'll love it 3000. Podcast 616. Disassemble.